What's up, gang? Coach Christine here, and I'm so excited to welcome you back to week 2 of the Empowered Mind Collective book club, where we are deep diving, continuing our journey through whole brain living by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. Last week, we explored some of the four characters and how they shape our reality. We kind of had the introduction in last week's video, and if you missed it, don't worry, you can always go back and watch the replay. But today we are going to dive into chapter 4 through 6, where we'll be taking a closer look at some of these characters and how they influence our thoughts, our behaviors, our relationships. And I can't wait to share some of my personal insights and to hear your experiences too. I'm still processing a lot of this information, still trying to figure out what it means for me. And I imagine that a lot of you guys are in the same boat. So, as always, I want to hear from you. Feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Let's get a great discussion going. That way, we can pick each other's brains and learn from each other, which is what these book club discussions are really all about. It's just all about a robust conversation, and my experience may not be yours, and that's okay. So, in chapters 4 to 6, we're just going to do a quick overview. Jill Bolte Taylor breaks down each of the four characters into more detail. These chapters really focus on recognizing which character is leading at any given moment. And wow, guys, this really got me racking my brain. I was like, this is complex. It felt like there's a lot of switching probably going on in my brain. And I don't know if you experienced that as well, but we're thinking about how we might switch between them to live a more balanced, empowered life. And we'll talk a lot about character 1 today. So that's what this big deep dive was about in these chapters. And I can't believe this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the characters. I still don't know if I have a name yet. I'll tell you a little bit about that a little later on for my character 1. And let's dive into chapter 4. So, tending to your four characters. In summary, in this chapter, Dr. Taylor encourages us to become more aware, which is my favorite thing. If you know me, that I believe that this personal awareness is really very much a superpower. And sort of an aside to this, I was watching a little tidbit of a Huberman Lab podcast today, and he had a guest on who was a relationship expert. And she was talking about how so much of what is going on inside of our brain is us creating this narrative. It's going back to those stories that we tell ourselves. And to me, this is what really self-awareness is about, is recognizing that we are telling ourselves stories. And yes, they are valid experiences, but from our perspective, right? So what other folks are experiencing, maybe in the same room, maybe sitting right next to you, could be very different. And that's what, to me, this paying attention is about. It's just being so self aware that we recognize that we are spinning these narratives, and this is our own unique perception. And that comes from a really a deep place of all of our experiences that we've had in our lives and who we are uniquely as individuals. So, really paying attention and checking in with ourselves, especially when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, which is something I've worked with clients on in the past because I find it really challenging to check in with ourselves when we are feeling stressed and overwhelmed. We kind of go to these default behaviors. So that's what Dr. Taylor is really encouraging us to think about. Like, what are my go to behaviors in these stressed out situations and why? Ooh, right? So, left brain characters. In chapter 5, we dive into the left brain character. So, character 1, the logical, organized, and task oriented side, as well as character 2, the emotional, reactive, and often fearful part. These are the characters that help us manage our day to day life, but they can also cause stress if they become too dominant. And she talks about how when she had her stroke, these were some of the characters that went offline for her. And this is very much in my mind where our seed of like, of course, task focusedness, sure, we'll call it that. That's where it sits, right? Our ability to function in day-to-day life. Um, but what about also our anxiety that comes along with that? The anxiety of showing up and doing your best work all the time. So that's what these characters are really about. And I found this so fascinating because I kind of struggled to differentiate them. So let's dive in and we'll see. We'll talk a little bit more about how this manifests for me. So she asks some questions that I found so valuable at the end of this chapter. The first one, and I encourage you, bust out your own notebook right now. If you didn't already answer these questions as you were going through the text, take some time and do it now because I took some time to do this and it was really insightful. So, question one, do you recognize your character one? And my answer to this was absolutely. I think my character one is a very dominant force in my life. I definitely identify as a rule follower, and I feel like this is character one. I create order in my business, in my life. I'm very punctual, and I have a hard time turning this character off. And oftentimes I wish I could because I know it causes me unnecessary stress and anxiety. Character one is the perfectionist. While I'm not always organized in every area of my life, I do enjoy organization and sometimes finding myself judging others if they aren't as organized. So that's, the good and the bad, right? Like we got to have this organizational piece of us that allows us to show up and allows us to have some order in our lives. But it can also hold us back. In a lot of my videos and podcasts and things, identify as like I said, a rule follower, but somebody who really likes and can go too deep into research, right? Research is a great thing. It's so good to understand all of the things that you're trying to learn about and apply in your life. But sometimes I'll spend so much time in research that I never actually put things into implementation. So this is, I think, where the seat of that analysis paralysis exists. It has to be perfect. I need to know more information. It has to be done at the best possible way. And then sometimes this leads to insane procrastination. And maybe this resonates with you. So recognizing when your character one is in charge, this is really what chapter 6 was about. This chapter really helped us recognize when one is taking control. And it's really the part of us that craves order, structure, and control. But like I said, can really let our anxiety kind of run unchecked. And it's interesting how character two is really that fear-based piece. So it's like they work together in sometimes not so great way. Um, so if you didn't recognize this part of yourself, it's worth asking, when do you assert your authority? So I thought this was a really interesting question to kind of see, okay, maybe character one isn't a strong character in my brain. And if you weren't sure, these were some of the questions. So for me personally, character one definitely comes out at work. It comes out in sports. It comes out with my son, sometimes in relationships. When it comes to organizing my time, I'm highly scheduled and focused and very bound by my plans. Also cause me insane anxiety because if things don't go the way that I plan for them to go, sometimes I'm too rigid about that. And I was always taught that, it was better to be on time or early, sorry, instead of being on time. It was like be early or you're late, basically, right? Like that is something that was hammered into my brain when I was a child. So punctuality is something that I'm really deeply driven by, but it really does get under my skin when it feels like outside factors are causing me to either be on time, God forbid, or be late, or when other people are like that. And when it's not malicious, right? They're not being malicious most of the time. It's just not their nature, their character, or maybe their extenuating circumstances. Yeah, that can really get to me. Here's another great question. What about order in your drawers and cabinets? This was a really interesting question for me because mostly, but not always, will you find order in my drawers and cabinets. There's some that are very organized, some that are very not. There are some, especially in shared spaces, that tend to be more organized, but if they're just for me, they're a little chaotic. So, what does that mean? And as far as money, I have a lot to learn here. So this is another place that you can think about your character one really coming into play. So to me, in my life growing up, money wasn't something that was openly discussed. It was often seen as something shameful, whether you had too much or too little. It's just something you didn't talk about, right? If you had too much, you're a bad person. If you had too little, you were a bad person, and everything in between. And she talked about this in the book, and the way that we, organize our money and use our money and plan. And this is something I'm just getting better at now at this time in my life, and budget and whatnot. To me, it was really scary and mystical. It was like magic. And I love now this character one part of me that's like, oh, there's actually rules to this, and it's not that bad. So I've learned to kind of be a lot more organized with that piece of my character one. So and not fall so much into my character two when it comes to money, right? Where the fear and the anxiety really live, and like the unknown. Character one doesn't like the unknown, and it'll let character two run wild with the unknown. And to keep me safe, stay away from it, right? That's not always the best way to approach things. The way she talks about character one, too, I really think of it sort of like our lizard brain. If you've ever heard that phrase before, it's like our instinctual part of our brain that actually protects us in a lot of ways. But now, because we are no more, you know, primitive creatures, it doesn't always serve us. So, one of the analogies I've used for this in my coaching practice and in other pieces of my life is like the stove, right? We know the stove is hot if the burner's on, and we know not to touch it because it's going to be painful. And that's important. Important for us to, have that little bit of fear ingrained in there about, oh, if I touch the burner, it's hot and it sucks and it's not going to be great, right? So that's like an instinctual fear that protects us. But we have the same reactions to things like or managing my bank account when we're making up these narratives about how scary it could be that aren't necessarily true. Whereas the stove is hot when it's on, right? That is a true thing. And it's there to protect us from burning ourselves and ultimately from dying. But I don't have to be afraid of my bank account in that way because even if I completely mismanage my bank account, hopefully, I'm not going to die. It will make my life uncomfortable, yes, but death is not an outcome. And it can be an unrealistic fear to face things. Exercise is another way that I think about this a lot of time. People come into the gym, into the studio, into my training practice, and they'll have fear around doing it wrong or breathing heavy or being uncomfortable. And trust me, I've had all these fears myself, and that'll keep them away from exercise because it's scary. What if I'm not doing it right? What if I get hurt? The what ifs, the shoulds really start to creep in, and that character too really runs amok and will keep us from doing something that ultimately is actually good for us. So, a reflection that I had after reading this bit was that I could nurture friendships better. Sometimes character one's perfectionism and focus on getting things done can definitely make me feel cold or distant when it comes to reaching out to friends. I think this crosses the boundary into other relationships because I'm very like it feels rational to me, but it can feel just unnecessary in a casual friendship, right? Or maybe just like I take things too hard and I'm think like, oh gosh, they said no. This is a great example. Actually, this is something that we talk about in our studio all the time, right? I invite people to do things. Let's keep it in the friend category, and I'll draw the connection to the fitness thing too. So you invite people to do something. Say you have a friend and you've asked her out, to go out to dinner with you two times, maybe we'll say two times, and every time she said no. Well, if I let my character one sort of run the show and my character two sort of run the show here. My character one is irritated because, I've been planning this probably. Let's be real. I've been planning this for a while. And what would be even worse in my brain would be if I asked them a long time ago and they said yes. And then as the date approaches, they bailed on me. Oh, that just makes my character one angry because my character one says, when you commit to something, you do it. She's very much in charge in a lot of things. And this is just for me, it's not true for everybody. And then my character two starts making up a story, right? About why this person doesn't want to hang out with me, or that they're a bad person or whatever. She runs amok. And I let her, unfortunately, run amok. And then I stop asking this person to go to dinner with me or to do something with me because it feels like too anxiety inducing. Even though many of those stories are probably not true, A, and B, Rocket. Rocket's here. I don't know what she's barking at. She's not getting up, but she's barking. And B, like, uh, I've shut myself off from this friendship because of these stories I made up, and I feel like they let me down, or I'm letting them down. So this is a really good example of how my character one can be too rigid in relationships, and character two will take over and make up all kinds of stories. You can relate this to your health, your fitness, your wellness, anything you're doing in your life that is positive and healthy for yourself. If you've ever had the experience of trying to invite a friend to come along with you, maybe you're in a dance class and you love it and it's so fun and you get to move and you get to be your authentic self and you're just having so much fun. You want other people to experience that with you. And you ask and you ask and you invite, and they say no once or twice, and then you give up. The same thing happens. We start to say, oh, maybe it's just not for them, or maybe they don't want to hang out with me, or whatever. But ultimately, we forget that everybody has life things happening. They're busy just as much as you are. They have things going on, and we just don't invite them anymore. But really, what that person probably needs, unless they straight up are like, hey, no, I'm just really not interested in this. Thanks. Don't get me wrong. Like, straight up answer like that, cool. But if they're like, not this week, or, the excuses that we give and get, I can't do it today because I have, a thing for my family or whatever, they're probably true. And they might come. You might ask them 10 times, 20 times, who knows? But when they do, they will be stoked, and so will you. So don't be rigid. Don't be a robot in your relationships. Give people grace and empathy. A couple other little reflections. Let's just take a second here to pause and reflect on how much time your character one is running your life. So, this was a question that she asked. I encourage you to ask yourself this. My guess was that character one is running 75 to 90% of the time, especially when it comes to work, my home life, and my friendships, which I guess that kind of covers everything. That's kind of scary. I want her less in my home life and my friendships, probably. She can hang around for work. And, just think about this for yourself. How much, if you could put a percentage on it, best guess, how much would you say your character one is running your life? And then, under what circumstances do you feel like character one is taking over? Is it work? Is it in relationships? Is there certain really detailed, specific things you can think of? I encourage you to answer that question. So a couple other reflections, personal insights, another question about just like how often I let character one take over. I think it's really easy for me to get caught up in the constant need for control and order, especially in my business and unfortunately in my personal life. But I also know this can be a source of stress for me, and I need to find ways to balance it with the other characters. So I'm excited to learn more about the other characters and see how they can help me not always be so rigid in circumstances that don't necessarily always call for it. Um, and then, just thinking about, can you create more space for these other characters, just drawing awareness to when you're switching characters. When are you falling into that fear-based character two mindset? These are just things to think about. One strategy that I found helpful is taking small moments during the day to intentionally shift characters. And this is something I want to practice on more, especially as we learn more about these other characters. I kind of already have an idea of what they might do, but like when my character one is getting too stressed, can I bring in character three's playfulness? Love that. Character three, can't wait to learn more about you. Or character four's sense of peace. I want play and peace a lot more. I don't know about you. It's not easy, but I think it's definitely worth practicing. It could be through dance, movement, stillness. I mean, there's so many opportunities to kind of dip into these other characters, and I'm looking forward to it. And if there's any strategies that you've had to try to manage or balance your character one, or if you're still, trying to figure it out like I am, what would it look like this week if you were to kind of become more aware of your character one when it's taking over, and how can you shift out of that when it's not the appropriate time? Like maybe you have a name for it and you're like, no, Annie. I don't know why I said Annie. That one was like, I was thinking about Annie for my character one, not gonna lie. It didn't feel 100% right, but I was thinking about it. You're like, no, Annie, we are having fun today. Today's my day off. It's been so insightful to explore how character one shows up in our lives and remember that all four characters have their purpose. And it's important to be aware of which one is really taking over. I have a feeling we found the ones that are taking over for me already right away, coming out of the gate, but knowing different people and the way they react to things and the way that they show up in work and play and just in different ways, right? Like part of what's so challenging for me as clearly a character one leader is understanding that not everybody functions like I do, and that's okay. So, for those of you guys that don't really resonate that powerfully with this character one, I can't wait to hear like your thoughts about this. And also, maybe there's a way that you need to turn up the volume on your character one, right? Maybe I do need to be more organized in my work. I need to be more organized in certain areas of my life. How can we embrace character one? So, my challenge to you this week is just to notice when character one is taking charge, and is it appropriate? Do we want character one in charge at that moment, right? If you're taking a math test, yes, you probably do. If you are playing with your child, probably not, right? So, what character do you want to strengthen this week? And think about how you can start bringing more balance into your daily life. For next week, we're going to be going into chapters 7 through 9. We'll explore more strategies for shifting between characters. We're going to get to know them a bit more, living a more integrated life. And be sure to bring your reflections on how you're balancing your character one. And thank you for joining me for today's discussion. It's always so meaningful to connect with you and share experiences. Don't forget to continue to reflect on your four characters this week, and feel free to share your thoughts either in my Facebook group here in the comments. I have a Slack community. We can talk on Instagram. There's so many places you can connect with me, and I hope that you will, because, like I said, this is really a robust conversation that we can have a lot of fun with if you are willing to dive in and give your take, because every single one of you guys is different. You're gonna be different than I am when it comes to how these characters show up in your life. And it's important to bring your own unique experience to the table. What else? What else? I think that's it. Yeah, we're going to keep going. We're moving on through these chapters. I hope you're enjoying the book as much as I am, and still always holding that, sort of highest understanding that it's not just about control, it's also about awareness and what feels right in each moment for you, and which piece of the brain, which sometimes is potentially someone taking over that you don't want, having an emotional reaction or falling into fear based reaction. Just becoming more and more aware of that. So that's how we can rewrite that narrative that we're telling ourselves, and having empathy and understanding that other people are potentially having a similar experience, yet writing that story so differently and getting curious. I love that thought of diving in and getting curious about what that looks like for them, what it feels like for them. One of the things I didn't mention that I love that Jill Bolte Taylor says so much in this book is just to think about, how does it feel in your body? How does that character one feel in your body? How does character two feel in your body? How do those emotions feel in your body? And it's so interesting to kind of see how we can each have different emotional responses, or just different responses to different emotions. So please do think about, why am I feeling this way right now? And what character is that associated with? Speaking of, how does it feel in the body? This is some of those questions that I wanted you guys to come back to. So, what does character one feel like inside your body? And my answers were anxiety, authoritative, maybe overbearing, and feels icky. That's a scientific term, feels icky. And that's it. Those were really my reflections when it came to character one, thinking about being a perfectionist and organization, feeling not so great all the time when I'm being too rigid. I'm Coach Christine. I'll see you next time. Happy reading.